Great. So welcome, everybody. This is week 2 of Mastering Difficult Conversations for May 1st, 2017. So I'm excited to be back here again this week. We've got kind of a chock full agenda. I'm so glad to see so many of you online because like I had said in week 1, this is a working webinar. So today we're going to be doing lots of work. So you're either going to really like me by the end of this or really not like me, and that's okay either way. So first thing I wanted to say, just to ask, I know all of you that are online right now are on mute, but I wanted to put it out there if you've got any questions or anything about the homework assignment from last week. So were you all able to come up with a difficult conversation that you wanted to be able to explore? No pressure. You don't have to share your difficult conversation. I just wanted to make sure that if anybody had any questions, that they had the opportunity to ask. Okay. So we'll be going through some stuff tonight. You know, I'm not sure if you guys had seen some of the Change My Life videos that are on our Facebook page before, but in one of those I explore, and I just bring it up here because I think it's an interesting fact that there, you know, difficult conversations or learning how to master those difficult conversations is an essential life skill. Like, it's not something that we get to avoid. It's kind of living life on life's terms, and having those relationships means that we're going to be approached with conflict. And like we had talked about last week, that it's either going to be, you know, destructive or productive, right? So when we're handed with challenging conversations, to learn how to be able to navigate those through, so that we can establish the relationship or continue to build trust, or learn how to set boundaries, or be able to have the productive result. Or also learn when to be able to end those conversations, which we're going to be able to know when to quit trying to salvage that relationship at the end of the 6 weeks together. But part of that research talked about the top 3 most difficult conversations to have. So it was interesting. So they talked about that the number 1 most difficult conversation that we're faced with is to ask our bosses for a raise. And I think that it is. I think I could agree with that. I think it's even just as challenging if you have a difficult boss. So for those of you that are in Alberta or in Canada, we've got a couple of people that are not from Canada that are watching the recordings because of time differences. You know, in today's economy, it's been challenging to be able to ask for what you need, and especially if that comes in you know, a financial request from your employer. You know, lots of employers are doing cost-effective measures, even still with some of the, you know, consumerism coming back or the economy lifting a bit, still really tight on cost-effective measures. Lots of layoffs that have been approached in the last couple of years. And so being able to ask your boss for, you know, a raise can be challenging. So I agreed with that one. In number 2 place was, confronting a coworker in inappropriate workplace behavior. You know, because as if, you know, sometimes our jobs aren't challenging enough, let's go ahead and throw in a coworker that can't seem to manage their own behavior or keep it workplace appropriate. So agree with that one too. And both of those might be one of the difficult conversations that you have. My experience as an HR manager for my corporate job is that those challenging conversations from coworker to coworker, especially if you're confronting about inappropriate workplace behavior, are challenging, and they're really, really common. And so learning how to be able to set boundaries, you know, as we talk tonight, we're going to talk about how to talk to some of those DISC personality profiles, right? So you might be able to identify in there, but also how to be able to stick to fact-based, kind of how do you find those initial words to have those conversations, and to make sure that it's something that you don't have to keep going back and revisit it over and over and over again. So I agreed with that being the second most challenging conversation. The third surprised me because I actually think that it should have been the number one, because it was talking to your partner of the dissatisfaction in your sex life. Like, how that didn't make number one is beyond me. But once again, it's a challenging conversation, and a challenging conversation, or an uncomfortable conversation that needs to be had. We're not taught to, I think we're getting better at this, but I know that I wasn't taught this in school, about how to be able to talk about sexual health, wants and desires, how to be able to talk about what you need for fulfillment in your sex life. We're not taught about that. So some sensitivity of being able to talk to your partner about that, and how you be able to approach it. So I did review those top 3 difficult conversations in my blog for the month of April. So if you're interested, please, in more details and more strategies on how to go through those 3 specific topics, you can check out my blog that's on Change My Life coaching on my page. So I just wanted to share those, because I thought that those top 3, those are doozers. So I agree with that. And I know that we've got the strategy, and we've got some of the skills that we're going to be reviewing to be able to approach all 3. So the other thing that I committed to doing at the beginning of today's recorded session was to be able to review kind of what I had talked about on the Q&A. And that's for the people that aren't on Facebook and didn't have the opportunity to see the Q&A live. So we really, last time we talked about the DISC model, right? So, and it was about how do you, look at yourself to be able to figure out where you identify on the DISC. And then when coming up with your difficult conversation, which we'll go into more detail tonight on, how do you start to identify where that person is? So we talked about, whether you're active or questioning, right? So if you were active and questioning, then you were D for the dominance style. So that dominance tends to focus on logic and obviously looking for the win in the conflict. We talked about people that were active and accepting were more of that I influence style. So people that I identify with really well, that need the expression of feelings during conflict. And I need to feel like I'm being heard too, so that there's that acknowledgement piece, or that sense of belonging piece for me. The thought, or being thoughtful and accepting, so that steadiness style, are inclined to be able to attend to all of the feelings in the conversation, but they also really seek to have that win-win, or that consensus as the conclusion of conflict. And then if you're thoughtful and questioning is the conscientious style. So they want to make sure that there is justice and logic introduced during the conflict, right? So it's about identifying ourselves on there. And we went through a bit of an exercise in week 1 to be able to determine, and then we wanted to start to think about where is the person that we're having the difficult conversation with in there as well. And like I said, we're going to get more into that tonight. So, if we want to be able to understand where we're currently at with our difficult conversations, I think it's important that we dive in just a bit deeper of the as-is state. So we need to be able to identify and understand where we currently are before we can start talking about what needs to be, okay? So I really want you to be able to capture your thoughts. So I hope that you brought your journals tonight, or at least have paper to be able just to jot down some of your thoughts. So when we're thinking about our as-is state, I want you to just take out that piece of paper, and I want you to list the problems or the issues you're currently experiencing because of this difficult conversation. So whoever you've got that difficult conversation with, just start to list some of the problems or some of the issues that you're currently experiencing. And so it really might be, what is the impact to your work, to your personal life, to your health and well-being? For some of us that like to avoid conflict, maybe you're avoiding going places that you don't have to run into them, or you're not, or maybe you're avoiding different social gatherings of mutual acquaintances that you guys have. Maybe it's keeping you up at night. I know one of the difficult conversations I had with my stepdaughter this week kept me up and one night, right? Or maybe it's just renting a whole lot of space in your mind. Okay. So I'm just going to give you, and I'm going to be using my clock a lot tonight just so that we make sure that we stay on time. I'm just going to give you another 60 seconds to wrap that up. Okay. So it's important to understand the as-is state so that we can start looking ahead at the change we want to see. So oftentimes we are feeling the pain or suffering as the as-is state, but not knowing exactly what it is or what we're experiencing. And that's why it's really important to start to identify what that as-is state is. And so just for the people that I can see online, just give me a thumbs up if you're all good to continue on. Awesome. Thanks, guys. So that's great, but we want to start to be able to concentrate on our to be state. So on the same piece of paper, I just want you to be able to start to identify in point form, what's the solution you're looking for? What would it look like, right? And then once again, what would be the impact to your work, your personal life, your health and well-being? Would it just be being at peace with that person? Would it not be walking on eggshells because there's tension in the air? Would it be a more satisfaction in your sex life if you had that difficult conversation with your partner, right? So who knows? Whatever that as-is state is. So I'm just going to give you a minute here to be able to jot down your thoughts around that. Okay. And once again, for those of you that are online that I can see, if you can give me a thumbs up, letting me know that you've had an opportunity to do that. Thank you. So, it's equally as important, just like it was to be able to identify the as is, to be able to capture the to be state so that it's clear for us on what we want. This way we know for certainty what it is we truly want and the impact it will have on us. So it serves as motivation to get the conversation done. When we can see it clearly, it allows us to be able to explain what it is we want and ask for what we need. I don't know if any of you have ever done this before, and I had a difficult conversation I had to have years ago with, I felt bored in my job. Like I felt that it was really mundane tasks that I was assigned. I was looking for something that had a little more breadth, a little more width, a little more depth to it. So that because I have this need of needing to be able to see where my contribution is going, that I'm contributing to the overall success of an organization. And when I approached my boss, I had talked about, I really don't like doing ABC in my job, but I really like doing XYZ. I would like to have more of XYZ. I need an opportunity for growth. I need all of this stuff. And she was able to take that feedback away and had committed to coming back to me with kind of some different opportunities for me to work on. Okay, except she came back with this great big list of stuff that I really didn't want to do. And it's because I wasn't clear on what I really wanted XYZ to look like. And so I wasn't able to communicate that effectively, and ended up having to go back and have a different conversation once again of, no, that's still not what I wanted, right? So, and I don't know if any of you have ever had that experience of when we're not crystal clear, it's kind of like you get tongue-tied on how to be able to describe what you want from that person or what you want the outcome to look like. So, I wanted to ask, and I only ask if you feel comfortable to share, what were some of the things that in your as is, you don't need to go into details of the content if you don't want to, that you're really seeing the impact have? Does anybody want to share what some of their points were? Remember that you would have to unmute yourself. Otherwise, I can't hear you. Okay, that's all good if nobody wants to share. So, like I had said to you before, that, you know, I've lost sleep over these kind of conversations. I know that I have also had some difficult conversations that needed to be happening. I can avoid conflict at times, depending on how close that personal relationship is. I've avoided social settings where I might run into that person, and it's just an awkward, awful feeling. And really, I've got a bit of a people-pleasing defective character as well, that can lend to me renting out a large portion of my head to people for very cheap. So I know that I wear that cost greatly in my as-is state when I'm trying to be able to avoid. I also know that when I face those difficult conversations and I have them, and I'm able to be clear on what I want that outcome to look like, the relief I feel is immense. It's also that I tend to make mountains out of molehills in my mind. So I've painted this big, scary picture of what this difficult conversation is going to be. And then I'm amazed after I've had it that it was like, it wasn't that challenging. And that the reaction was not that they ripped off my face and could not believe that I ever brought this conversation. It was more of an accepting and a way to have a really productive conversation. So, this part for me, this strategy for me is really important because it helps me get back down to what's fact-based, what's realistic. It helps me get really clear on my communication of having those conversations. Awesome. Good. Okay. So, oops. And I need to do this. Okay, so setting up your initial words. So like I said, it's really important to make sure that we've got that clarity of our desired outcome, that to be state. We have to remember why we're having this conversation as well, right? Like what's the point? And sometimes it is the selfish drivers for me to be able to get the relief. Sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes it's about getting heard. Sometimes there is a very clear end result or a goal or a change that I'm asking somebody to make, or a change that just needs to happen in the relationship. And so keeping that, and I even recommend that people, when we go through this next exercise of being able to start to think about your initial words, I recommend that people keep those as pointers or notes as pointers to guide the conversation. Because I know for me, I can get really, because I'm emotionally based, because of my I know that I can get really heated in discussion or passionate about in discussion, that I can lose my train of thought of where I'm going and what was the point of the entire conversation in the first place. And then we're totally down some other road that we didn't need to be down at all. So it's remembering why and getting clear on that. And then we do it like we had done last week of considering what our personality style, then we really need to start to consider the personality style of somebody else. When I go and talk to Kyle, who is a D, not that Kyle's insensitive, he'll hear me on my feelings, but if Kyle's got a checklist, laundry list of stuff that he needs to get done for the day too, it's harder for him to hear what's going on for me and my emotions if I don't kind of get right to the point. So those are some of the things that I have to consider when I need to have a difficult conversation with Kyle is what is fact-based, what's results-driven, so that he gets the clarity that he needs, and then we can move right through the conversation. But still an opportunity for me to express my feelings so that I can honor myself in that, and a way for me to be heard on what's going on for me during that conflict. So like I said, before you start, you want to make sure that you've considered your desired outcome and remember why you're having this conversation, and consider the personality point of the person you are speaking to. So what I want you guys to do now is we're going to take the next 5 minutes to really start to put together your initial words. So how you're approaching this difficult conversation. And what I want you to write down the thing you need to say in its simplest, matter-of-fact terms to start. So just start simple. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's just very simple on how you're starting. Like, hey, Catherine, I need to have a conversation with you. Hey, Catherine, do you have time for a conversation? Like, we're just starting from bare bones, simple terms. And then I always like to start with I, right? I is being responsible for me and for my part in the conversation. It also tends to put people on the less defensive when we're talking about things with me, instead of going in with, you do this, you make me feel. It's, I feel when this situation happens, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So some of the I statements that you can choose or start with is I need, I want, I noticed, I have, or I am. So like I said, I'm going to give us 5 minutes here to really start to put together your initial words for your difficult conversation. And if you happen to have questions that come up during this time, please just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. But I will leave you 5 minutes to start to get those words. How are people finding their initial words? We finding them? Awesome. Okay. I just want to be able just to give people just a couple more minutes just to wrap up, is that there's some that are still writing there. Okay, and just for those of you that are online that I can see, if I could just get a thumbs up if you're all done. Thumbs up if you're all done. Yay. Okay. So we're gonna have some time to continue to work with this exercise in a moment too. So when we're starting to consider our initial words and setting up those initial words, when we're looking at other people and what their disc style is. So, like I said, if they're a D or a dominance, we want to make sure that our initial words to keep it really straight to the point. So keep it as is, but have those supporting words, right? So D's don't mess around with feelings, or they don't like it being kind of walking around on eggshells. They want it straight to the point, no fluff, just peel the Band-Aid off, right? So you'd be better off just to be straight up with a D. So if they're I for influence, I want to change it to a question that involves their brainstorming. So I was hoping that you could help me with something. You know, I'm struggling with this. I was wondering if I would be able to talk to you about it. Or I'm feeling a little confused and I'm looking for clarity. Can you talk to me about it? That's what I used to recommend to employees that had I bosses that were confused on expectations, or felt like they were getting two different expectations depending on what day of the week it was from their boss, right? So sometimes with I's, it can become a little confusing, not as clear cut. And so for S, so soften the ask, preface the importance of how much you care. So this might even be asking if they've got time, that you wanted to be, that you value their opinion, that you wanted to hear their feelings about it, so it's really about softening the initial words that you use. And then C is conscientiousness. Ignore the blue that's on the screen. I forgot to take that off. We also do colors as well as disc. And so if you follow colors, C is blue. So, but you want to build your evidence. So remember that these are the ones that want logic, right? So you're going to come in with a lot of examples, build your evidence, make the ask, and explain why after the ask, right? So these are people that are going to want examples that they might not be clear, especially if you're asking them for a behavior change or you're confronting on a behavior. You're going to want to have examples of times that they've demonstrated those behaviors, right? So those are kind of how to be able to consider the other person. So D, remember, it's fact-based. I, it's feelings-based. And S is all about the consideration, the even playing field, and C is all about the questions, right? So does that help make the disc a little clearer? I know that there was some questions last week. Good, I'm getting some thumbs up. Awesome, thank you very much. That helps me. Okay, so we're going to come back to this exercise in a moment, but I wanted to be able to talk a little bit about obstacles. So we've explored conflict. We've reviewed the basics around communication, so the need for a messenger and a receiver. We've explored the framework of productive conflict. We've explored how you as an individual react to conflict, the need to curb destructive conflict behaviors and using productive behaviors instead. We've now gone a bit deeper of understanding, or by first of all identifying the conversation that needs to be had, what our as is states, so the impact of not having that conversation yet, or in the middle of that conversation, or considering having that conversation is having on us, and then also what our to be states are, so what our hope of having the outcome to this, what the resolve is to this. and consideration of those styles. But then we need to talk a little bit about obstacles, because like we had talked about in the main frame of basic communication, it is so highly sensitive or subjected to have the potential for conflict with misinterpretation of body language, of language styles, of not hearing things correctly or making assumptions. We've got this external noise factor. We've got internal noise with our own thoughts and our own feelings going on. So there's so much that could go off course, that we need to be able to talk about the obstacles. So difficult conversations are, in fact, guess what? They're difficult, right? So, and especially a conversation that involves an emotional reaction, right? Usually these are about asking someone to change, or we're introducing a change. And all of that can be challenging, of leaving out feelings, so that we avoid the escalation, right? So that it doesn't turn out of control or into an out of control conflict. So I think the first step to avoid escalation is to take care of your own feelings. So remember, we talked about that the timing had to be right time, right place. And that sometimes the difficult conversation can only happen right now. Well, this is essential for it to avoid the escalation, especially if it is emotionally charged. And for me, that's when the relationship's closer to me. So I tend to be more emotionally charged with, my spouse, with my children, with my parents, with my friends, than I would as a colleague, even a boss or a subordinate, right? That they're that much more removed. So I'm able to keep my own emotion in check. But if I am emotionally charged, then I'm taking the opportunity to take care of my own feelings. So it's prior to having that conversation. I might need to have a conversation with a trusted individual, that I can vent out some of those feelings, that I can ask them to help me put it into perspective, right? To bring it from an emotional plane back to reality, so that I can have the conversation. And it's also to make sure that I'm not using the venting, though, to avoid having the difficult conversation. So my purpose of calling my trusted friend to use as a sounding board is strictly that, to use them as a sounding board, to move me forward to having the difficult conversation, not about avoiding it. So be empathetic. So we've got to remember that, if we're not about to have a difficult conversation with somebody else, we're about to have one brought to us. So I think for every difficult conversation that I've had, I've also had somebody bring one to me, right? That, that they've felt that they've wanted me to change a certain way that I react to things, or that there's a change in my work style that they want, or there's a change that needs to be brought about in the relationship. So we have to remember to put ourselves in other people's shoes and think about how they would feel about what we're telling them, right? So how would you feel if the roles were reversed? And I think it's also in being empathetic that we're giving other people time to be able to respond and ask questions, right? So that you're not planning or scripting out your difficult conversation of, here's my speech and you don't get to say anything, actually, and then I just walk away, right? Like, that's not what this is. It's an opportunity to have a conversation that it happens both ways. Breathe, stay calm. So communication becomes easier when we're calm, right? So take some deep breaths. Take your time about this. When we come from a place of like an air of calmness, others are more likely to remain calm too, right? That it's kind of like they reflect our own energy. So this is where it comes in handy, like I said, to make some brief notes about what you want that outcome to be, because it helps you stay focused. Keep focused on what you want to be able to say. It helps you not deviate from the plan or get distracted from the reason that you're trying to be able to communicate. And in fact, I would say that that's so important. I put that down in your notes, on whatever page that we just did the as is to be state, to really put that communication becomes easier when we're calm. And so even if it's a simple note reminding yourself to breathe, is going to be really important. Okay, so we want to be able to stick to the facts, right? Bring examples, be specific. I don't know if any of you, I've had this happen to me, where you're pulled in by your employer for a review, and it's, you know, the example that they bring you is either so vague that none of it makes sense, or it was like 8 months ago that you can't even remember it, right? So it's got to be relevant, and it's got to be specific examples that you're giving. So, and be prepared that, you know, Ds are going to challenge some of it. If they can't see the facts in it, or they don't understand the feeling, they're going to want specific examples to help them see it. You know, for those Cs that, you know, feel that it's unjust, like that you're bringing an example that is vague and they can't relate to it. In fact, they think that it's outright not how it was. They're going to question it. So be able to stick to the facts and stay calm. So avoid statements that cannot be demonstrated by examples. You're going to want to focus on the behavior, not the person. So we're talking about behaviors, not the person, right? Something what I'm, you know, when I have to have difficult conversations with my children, I'm really, really mindful, you know, when Darius was little, that I'm not saying, you're bad, right? We talk about misbehaving, we talk about behavior, but he's not bad. We're not labeling him, right? And it's very similar even with the conversations that I had, you know, last week about disappointment, that I'm disappointed in behavior, not in them as people, right? So language is a big one of being able to focus on behavior characteristics, not the person. It's also that you want to focus on actions, not intent. And it's because I don't think anybody, even on their worst day, wakes up and says, today I'm going to work and I'm going to ruin it for everyone, right? Like, I don't think anybody does that. I don't think anybody wakes up with the intentions of being a jerk. I think life happens and their mood twists, and that they sometimes choose their actions poorly, but I like to come from a place where I assume that everybody's got the best of intentions. And so talk about the actions. We already talked about using I statements. So an I message can help you communicate your concerns, feelings, and needs without blaming others or sounding threatening. And it helps you get your point across without causing the listener to shut down, right? Automatically, if we used empathy and we're putting you do this, you do that, as a listener, I'm done because I'm already on the defensive, right? And then the last one there under escalation is watch your language and ignore the verbal. It's supposed to be no verbal. So it's the verbal and non-verbal communication that we have to watch for. But literally, like it's about watching your language too, right? Most of these are sensitive enough that they don't need the vulgarity, they don't need the jargon even. I think sometimes when we get into shop talk at workplaces, jargon can become very confusing. I know for me, I have to be, my spouse is a C. I have to be mindful of using life coachy terms is what I call them, because he finds them fluffy and annoying and frustrating, and it's only because he can't internalize them and figure out what they mean for him. So we speak two different languages. So I've got to be very mindful when I'm bringing difficult conversations to him that I'm not talking the fluff. And for him, he has to dig and be able to talk about feelings. Which isn't something that comes natural to him either. So it's being mindful of each other that way. We want to make sure that you're checking in for clarity too, because I think that that's part of watching your language as well, right? So whether it's a language difference, maybe it's a misinterpretation of the verbal or nonverbal cues, that we're checking in and just asking is that what you mean? You know, if they're sitting with their backs towards you and they're crossing their arms, right? Like, is that what they're intending to give you as the message? Okay, so this next part about managing the noise and the stories, and this is really important too. So really take some good notes here, because I think that this is something that is so key in learning how to be able to master difficult conversations, or approach approach difficult conversations. Is we all fall into the stories. So this is really about managing the noise. And so there are 3 story traps that I think I have gone into all 3 of them, and sometimes continuously over and over and over again. So it's just being really aware. So the first story is the victim story, and that makes you out to be the innocent sufferer. Okay, so that this is happening to you, that this person is the big bad wolf, and how dare they? And I always say to my clients, in every problem, I own 1%. The other person might be 99% in the wrong, but I own the 1% there somewhere. So if I want to get to the truth, and if I want to get to a place of my desired to be state, I have to find that 1% and take acknowledgement to be able to acknowledge it and take responsibility for it. Dr. Phil is great about this. He talks about you cannot change something that you don't acknowledge. So it's about finding the 1%. And really it's by asking, like, am I pretending not to notice my role in this problem? And sometimes my role is that I didn't have the difficult conversation, that I didn't set the boundary, that I said yes, or I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I needed. I wasn't clear enough on my side. Sometimes that's my 1%. Okay. The next story is what I call the villain story. So this would once again emphasizes the other's negative qualities. And so in the part that I said that I assume that everybody's acting with their best intentions, that everybody's coming from their best intentions, nobody woke up this morning to ruin my day. So I have to ask myself, like, why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do this? This is how the law judges us. The law judges our story, is that a judge will say it comes from a place, or most of the law is based on what a reasonable, rational, decent person would do. So ask yourself, instead of making them out to be the villain, if that's, why would they do that? Okay. And then the third one is the helpless story. And that's the story that convinces you that you have no options for taking any healthy action, right? Like, so what's the point? There's no point to this. It's never going to change, right? That it just is what it is. And the story that I always tell here is, I was struggling with a significant relationship in my life. I was really struggling with, and I was venting to a friend and saying, like, you think after all of this time they would change. Like, I've had to talk to them so often about this behavior. You think that they would get it by now and that they would change. Like, nothing changes. It's been years and years of the same crap. Why am I bothering having this conversation? And the best feedback, advice that she gave me in that moment was, funny, neither does your reaction to it. And I was like, crap. Like, that's my 1%, right? That I'm responsible for my reaction. And so as much as I was, coming from this helpless state that nothing's ever going to change, that there's nothing I could possibly do, I've already had this conversation a million times, that my 1% tells me I still need to go and have it. I still need to go have that difficult conversation, because it was about my reaction, and I was still falling into the same old, right? So be really aware of those 3 story traps. So I just want to pause for a second, just because I just shared a whole whack of information there for you. And I'm just going to set my clock for 60 seconds, because I know that sometimes people need to think about what they've just written and think if there's any questions. So I just want to give an opportunity for people to ask any questions. Remember to unmute yourself, because you're muted. just in case there's any questions. And so what's interesting with this is that, you know, no wonder these are difficult conversations, right? No wonder that it's called mastering difficult conversations, because it's a whole lot more complex than just having a straightforward talk, right? Like I think humans and their relationships are way more complex. So not only is the communication process complex, where it's vulnerable to conflict, there's a whole lot of internal noise or consideration to the other person, the circumstances, the environment, everything that we have to be aware of too. And in a coming session, we do talk about how environment plays a role, right? Some of the habitual patterns we can get into when it comes to having that same difficult conversation come up over and over again. So we'll dive more into that then. So so this is just kind of, like I said, we've kind of come up with our initial words. We're starting to identify how that person falls into the disc. We know how we fall into the disc. And now we've got to give some consideration to some of the obstacles that can occur in that conversation to really help us successfully navigate through it. So, my friends, this is homework for week 2. We've got our initial words. And now, knowing what you know about the obstacles and some consideration for the disc qualities, I want you to tweak it. Does it sound positive? Right? If you go in there sounding negative or like a bull in a china shop, guess what's going to happen? It's going to escalate pretty fast. Is it clear? So is your to be state in those words of what you want at the end of this conversation? I want you to think about the obstacles that we talked about. How can this possibly be misconstrued? Is there a way to make it clear? And then lastly, can you actually imagine yourself saying it? So it's not about being so scripted that it's, now you sound like Carrie Webster having your difficult conversation. It's about making sure that you're owning this conversation, that they are your words, and that it's something that you're going to be comfortable saying it. And I think of all of the steps around mastering your difficult conversation, finding those first words is really where the challenge is. It's about how do you confront the situation. And so that's really what this week is going to be about. We're going to talk about some more examples on the Q&A, mostly about it. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those stories still, and how stories can lead us to further conflict. Please, if you've got questions or you've got what if scenarios, right? Like, Carrie, you haven't talked about this scenario. This is kind of a scenario that I would like you to talk more about. Please feel free to email those. Feel free to jump on Facebook and put them on the Facebook page. I'd love to be able to address those in the Q&A this week. And next week, we're really going to go into, so we've got this internal noise, we've got external noise. These people are now going to have a part in this conversation. So how do we really become effective listeners? And what does listening have to do with conflict? And what does listening have to do with whether this is a successful conversation or becomes further destructive? Make sense? Okay. Thank you for the thumbs up. Any further questions on this? That homework is clear? Awesome. Good. So that was awesome. We got through that really quick, quicker than I thought. But like I said, I'm around in Facebook for the next little while, or available for email in the next little while. Please reach out if you've got any questions. And if not, I'll either see you on Thursday or next Monday. Okay? Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Carrie.
Okay.